All right, good afternoon, everybody. How are you? Oh, yeah. What's going on in the world? The whole world is going crazy. We have to pray. Ein lanu al mi l'shoen el Avinu b'shamayim. We have no one to depend on other than our Father in heaven. That doesn't mean that we stop doing what we got to do. We have to be activists. We have to stand up, defend this great country from the communists who want to destroy it from inside. We have to work to improve brotherhood between all Americans. I think there's a major issue that we see in America today. I would say the difference between the Republican approach and the Democrat approach is as follows. The Democrat approach is essentially segregationist because they need demographics in order to survive, because they're Democrats, they work on demographics, block voting, so forth. The Republican message is an individualistic message. So to the Republican, skin color means no more than eye color. You have a lot more brotherhood among a lot more of the more conservative elements in America, overlooking separations of race and so forth. It's particularly true in certain churches more than others, although in general a lot of the Protestant churches tend to be segregated. The Catholic Church, it's one church. It's Catholic. The Jehovah's Witnesses are the same thing. You don't see as much of that in certain other communities, but it shouldn't matter. It shouldn't matter. And in general today, that's the American conservative ideology, which is the Republican ideology from the beginning. Limited government, individual freedoms, and things like that. We see what's going on now, just the sheer anarchy. Now, and there's a dichotomy that exists here, because for the most part, as what I see, I'm saying the real Republicans, the average educated Republican wants to remove the statues of Confederate generals and so forth, because they're all Democrats and they're traitors to this country. And it's people who are historically Democrats, many of whom are now really still neo-Confederates, still secessionists perhaps. So a lot of them are the ones who are trying to maintain these things. The people who say that it's part of their heritage, they're not all white supremacists. And so when the President Trump said there are fine people and bad people on both sides, he was meaning, like, he wasn't taking a side. He was being neutral, and showing that there were violent extremists on both sides and peaceful protesters on both sides who had legitimate arguments and claims. But at this point, it's just getting to the point where there's this idea to seek out to undermine just about everything that America stands for. They want to remove Abraham Lincoln. They want to remove Ulysses S. Grant. I'm all for removing any thing that honors Woodrow Wilson. I think Woodrow Wilson was the worst president. He was worse than Obama, and everything that Obama did was rooted in the evil that Woodrow Wilson brought into this country. It has to be done in a legal way. It's a long time coming, and it's, I think, something that we can be united about, but it has to be done in a legal way. And the same thing, I don't care even the worst of the Confederate generals, so forth. It has to be removed in a legal way and not in an illegal way. And I think, personally, a lot of and these things have to be done according, whether it's by a referendum or whether the legislature wants to vote on these issues, then find out, who donated the statues, maybe what were the conditions of the donations and so forth, and things like that. But if we work on these things enough, we're going to get to the point where indeed we can work it out. But to go and want to remove George Washington because he happened to own slaves, and when that was the culture he was in, I want to tell all the religious Zionists, why don't we cancel Rabbi Cook? He was against women's suffrage. It's and the women's suffrage is probably maybe the one good thing that happened during the Wilson administration. Everything else was awful. He was an evil man, Woodrow Wilson. Arrogant, full of himself. People point out his religiosity, but to me, if he, and his father was a pastor, but there's just something about Woodrow Wilson that just reeks of arrogance. It's everything that Jesus preached against, if he's a Christian. He embodied that. The way that in the Christian writings, how Jesus talked about the Pharisees, he embodied that, Woodrow Wilson, in his religiosity as well. It was an arrogant religiosity. Which I think then that brings us to another subject that some people wanted to bring up. Although with the statues, we could talk about this week's parsha with the snake, the brazen serpent, the copper snake, the Nachash, the Saraf, that Moses was commanded to put up on a stick. And many centuries later, Hezekiah destroyed and didn't care that it was an ancient relic from Moses. He was ready to just destroy it because he saw it didn't serve the use that it did in the time, and it was actually being something negative, and for that the sages praised him. But since I'm mentioning Christianity, and some of our viewers have asked that I should touch upon this, and I touched on it already, but I'll talk about it a little bit more. So there's a channel in Israel. Well, there's a channel it exists in other countries, God TV. I never heard of it before. I thought I knew a lot of the Christian channels, TBN and TCT and so forth. And one of the viewers who's writing to me identifies herself as Catholic, and so you have EWTN. It's a Catholic channel. And I wish, some of the Jewish channels were as religious as the Christian channels are. JBS used to be called Shalom TV. There's actually a Christian channel, Shalom TV now. But JBS specifically says it's not a religious channel. which I think is a shame. And what religious material they have there, it's different. It's whatever it is, what it is. I mean, there is Hidabrut in Israel and in America, and that's really what I wanted to touch on with this issue with God TV in Israel. The first thing about is that Israel is a more socialist country. You don't have the freedoms that you have in America, and everything is socialized, and all the media and everything is government run, and a lot of things that are, that are not legal are pirate radio stations and so forth, and there are plenty of them, but they're not they're not legal in Israel. I think Aretz Sheva for a long time was a pirate station. I think maybe now it's legal, I'm not sure. In any event, I find it interesting that this viewer, Queen Bee, commenting on one of my recent videos, is asking why, and she identifies herself as a Catholic, and why God TV was removed. And so I'll say on my side, I don't think it should be removed because I at least don't think rabbis should be arguing for its removal, because eventually it's going to lead to it's going to lead to trouble, put it mildly. People are going to, if what's good for the goose is good for the gander. And so if the Christian TV stations are removed, the religious Jewish stations might, like I said, Hidabrut is a great station, and that could be removed. And also there's a hypocrisy there, is that what kind of evil stuff is on Israeli TV, whether it's heretical things or whether it's immoral things, pornographic things, maybe things that are not technically considered pornography, but there's nudity on broadcast television, not just talking about cable, as it is in Europe. And these types of things, if a country, Israel, they claim, they call themselves a Jewish state, and yet they're Avi Avos Tumah. They're the great-grandfathers of impurity, all kinds of things, particularly in the Israeli media. I mean, I remember a friend of mine talking about, this was back in high school, or maybe it was, I think he said he was visiting Israel, and he put on the TV, and he had never heard of the documentary hypothesis of higher biblical criticism until he saw it on Israeli TV. So that's heresy. It's a much more dangerous heresy than anything that the Christians are talking about. And yet this garbage is on Israeli TV, and then people are upset about Christian stuff on the Israeli TV. We have to be worried about what's essentially an atheist jihad, an atheist, what do they call, proselytism, to put the biblical criticism on Israeli TV. But the thing is, they teach it I think they teach it in Israeli schools too, because I know they teach Bible in Israeli schools, but I think they teach it from a critical standpoint and not from a religious standpoint. I'm talking the public schools, religious schools obviously are different. But this guy, he said he'd never been exposed to this before. I mean, Baruch Hashem, I know enough to be exposed to it, and there's always different views on how to approach this. But I think Rabbi Hertz, the Hertz Chumash, was very popular in a lot of shuls for a long time. Rabbi Hertz really answers that very well, and Rabbi Miller answers it very well, and a lot of other answers to biblical criticism. Although I think they asked Rav Shach once if they should teach apologetics to prove biblical criticism wrong to girls in Jewish seminaries. And he said, why even introduce the subject to them? Why should they have to know about it? They never heard of it before, and now you're going to introduce them to it, and how do you know that your argument is going to be stronger, your apologetic argument is going to be stronger than theirs? But anyway, these are the reasons why I think, at the very least, that the people who give the license or whatever for the TV stations, they can do whatever they want. But I see secularism as a bigger threat than Christianity. I saw Rabbi Skobach, with all due respect, and I don't have any disrespect for him, and others, Jews for Judaism, they were saying, here you have these secular Jews are being ripped away from their heritage and adopting Christianity. They're already ripped away from their heritage by the Zionists. It's not the Christians who are ripping them away. You're talking about these people are already spiritually dead. They're already heretics. So it's a difference. Is one heresy or another heresy? From my perspective. And not only that, but the Christian heresy is much closer to Judaism than the atheism of the Zionists. And so there's hypocrisy there. They're both, and they're both forbidden to us, but still, we're dealing with this hypocrisy. When it comes to these other issues, so then we have this with this. So I don't. It's not my job to tell the whatever they call the FCC, whatever, of Israel, how they should handle things. But I think the rabbis just have to tell Jewish people, this is not for you, or know what you're dealing with if you're going to watch this, and not, because the fact of the matter is, a lot of religious Jewish people watch Christian television, listen to Christian radio. I know rabbis, they get ideas for their sermons from Christian radio sometimes, and I know the same thing, Christian pastors who sometimes listen to Jewish rabbis to get an idea, meaning to get a joke, to get something to use in a sermon. It's a secret, but it's true. Anyway, if to Queen Bee, you're Catholic, I want to explain why, perhaps from a Catholic perspective, there's an issue with this God TV, and why the Israeli government took away the license from God TV. And this is as follows. So first of all, proselytizing is legal in Israel as long as one is not proselytizing minors. And I'm pretty sure God TV is not the only Christian station in Israel. The issue is as follows. If it was in Arabic, because it's there for the Arab Christians, no one would have any issue with it. The issue is more that it's in Hebrew, but there are Hebrew-speaking Christians too in Israel, or English-speaking Christians, other languages. So basically what they're saying, if you want a Christian channel for the Israeli Christians, it should be in Arabic and not in Hebrew. The truth of the matter is, they don't control the internet. You can access all these things. You can go on YouTube. You can go on the website. You don't need it to be on cable. How many people? I don't know what it's like in Israel, but how many people are really watching cable? Old people. There's cord cutting going on today. I'm sorry, I'm a little tired. So, wer weiß, I don't know. But, I know from the Catholic perspective, there's a opposition to what's called Judaizing. And I think that's, really what the issue is here, meaning the Judaizers, they call themselves Messianic Judaism. They're presenting themselves, they're selling Christianity and calling it Judaism. The truth is, the way it could be explained to a Christian, can you imagine if the Muslims would go and say that they're Christian because they venerate Jesus as a prophet, I think as a Messiah in Islam, but they obviously their theology, the Islamic theology, is different than the Christian theology. If anything, the Islamic theology is much more similar to the Jewish theology. The major difference between Jews and Muslims is that the Muslims have Jesus and Muhammad as prophets, and we say that they ran a non-profit organization. Or it's just not on our radar. We Jews feel about, because I have a lot of Christians asking themselves, where does Jesus fit into your belief system? I said, that's like me asking you as a Christian, where does Muhammad fit into your belief system? Where does Joseph Smith fit into your belief system? Why aren't you a Jehovah's Witness or a Mormon? It's the same question. And it's just simply put, it's not on our radar. And that's it. And that's the story. So what else can we say here? That Fox there. What else can we say about this? So, the main issue that I agree, we should not be there's an issue of false advertising when you conflate Christianity and Judaism. I defended, I don't remember the name of the guy now, Kelly, I think was his last name. There was a Catholic missionary who was invited to speak in a synagogue, and he wasn't going to speak about religion. He was going to be respectful, and a lot of people with big mouths they made a whole stink, and he canceled his visit. And I thought that was improper because he's being honest. He's not there. He's not trying to sell something when it's not. But when people try to conflate Judaism and Christianity, it's false advertising. But the truth is, it's just as bad the humanist Jews who conflate atheism and Judaism, or the Zionists who conflate nationalism and Judaism. All of these heretical movements, even the Reform, are the only one that maybe, and they've in many times gone too far with certain things. More in recent times, the conservative movement, maybe we could say, is still somewhat a part of Klal Yisrael, but they're not totally aloof from halacha. Their ideology is not necessarily heretical, and is really essentially orthodox, and even essentially orthoprax, but problematic, and not our approach. I could accept them though, and I could accept some of the other, what do they call, certain of the Orthodox black Jews, and some of these, and even perhaps to a certain extent, some of the Orthodox Messianics. I think that they're wrong, but I don't think they're heretical, which is different than Jews for Jesus and some of which are just preaching Christianity and not preaching the need to keep halacha, even though Jesus himself taught that the scribes and Pharisees for they sit in the seat of Moses, and that if someone calls himself Messianic Jewish, they should keep halacha, because that's what Jesus taught. And again, I don't care what Jesus says any more than the Christian cares what Muhammad says or Joseph Smith says. But a Christian should care what Jesus says, I think. And certainly someone who calls himself a Messianic Jew, who tries to conflate Christianity and Judaism. But the point where Christianity and Judaism are separate, in my mind, is not really even so much the devotion to Jesus. I believe that is improper, but it's not necessarily heretical. One aspect, though, that is heretical is the divinity of Jesus. That is problematic to us, and the other issue is that halacha is no longer binding, which is not what Jesus taught, and I don't really think is what Paul taught either. Meaning, I think Paul was pretty much like most of the modern day rabbis who discouraged conversion. That's pretty much who Paul was. He wasn't saying that someone who's already in the covenant has to leave the covenant. I don't even think that when Peter said that all the impure animals, he had a dream of the impure animals, I don't think that meant that you didn't have to keep kosher anymore, even though that's how the church has interpreted it. There are other interpretations, which are quite friendly and beautiful interpretations. But it's instead it's interpreted like this, and there's a lot of issues to talk about. I've rambled on for a half hour without really saying much, so I'm gonna end it now. Thank you for watching. God bless. Please like, share, and subscribe, comment, and we'll see you all later.